Before we begin the episode, I would like to thank our sponsor, Chin Up Goggles, the new generation of vision training. Its simplistic design eliminates downward vision, improving a player's spatial awareness, anticipation, skill acquisition and execution. The findings have been supported by scientific research in CIT, now MTU. Be sure to visit chinupgoggles.com for more. Welcome back to the Sideline Live podcast. You can follow us over on Twitter and Instagram at the Sideline Live. We'd love to hear from you. On episode 73, I'm delighted to be joined by London GAA Senior Football Manager Michael Maher. Just a quick note, this episode was recorded a number of weeks ago following their first National League win. In this episode we discuss his coaching journey, working with soccer, South London GAA Feile team and so much more. Hi Michael, thanks a million for joining me on the podcast.
Thanks very much, Orla. Thanks for joining me on.
Before we get into everything, I have a lot of coaches listening from a lot of different backgrounds. Would you mind giving a quick elevator pitch to those who might not know who you are?
Yeah, I'm managing the London senior football team now at the moment. I've grown up in London, so Gaelic football and hurling are kind of alien to a lot of people I'd have been friendly with growing up. But I was always very passionate about them. My parents were both, dad was Irish, mum, daughter of parents from Cork and Kerry, dad's a Kilkenny man. So had no choice really but to play GAA. Played them all my life and then kind of got into coaching and managing and teaching, and coaching was just a real passion of mine, I guess, from the age of 18, and went into soccer first, worked at Red Hill, did my coaching badges in soccer, and then once I fell out of soccer kind of that summer, went back coaching my own club team, ladies club team, and then ended up getting an opportunity to coach the London senior team under Ciaran Deely, and then ended up with a management job. So it's kind of gone full circle. I've done the whole underage all the way up to underage up to senior, men's and ladies. I've gone kind of full circle and loved every minute of it.
How do you explain GAA to somebody in London that has never heard of it before? How does that conversation start?
Whenever the kids at school, when you're first introducing it to kind of kids at school here, you just describe it as a combination of football, netball, basketball, rugby, and then kind of once you've made it sound like a bit of a mismatch of all the different skills and a bit of physicality, they kind of look at you if you're mad.
Yeah.
Look, they're big enough to teach it in schools as well, and the kids take to it very, very quickly because it's such a new sport to them all. So both boys and girls are starting off on an even par, and I found they've really enjoyed it. Mm-hmm. Growing up, definitely, like when you were saying to my friends, especially before it was on Sky TV and it had the exposure it's got now, it was totally alien. And as before kind of the YouTube, you'd have to show them maybe a picture or say go on the internet and just type in rules of football. You wouldn't have had the videos to refer to at that stage. But look, times have moved on. I think a lot more people know what it is now, probably thanks to Sky Sports kind of highlighting it across the water.
Have you noticed a shift since Sky have started showing games in the UK? Has there been a shift in people not even involved in sport but just wondering, what is this? I want to see this.
Definitely. And I remember I was looking on Twitter, I think one of the first weekends hurling was on there and people were saying, this sport's mad. Like, where can we watch more of this? So I think like to a neutral, if you're just a sports fan and you're watching the game and you're kind of an Invasion Games fan and winning and losing and tackling and like drama, like you couldn't ask for any more from the two sports really, football, hurling, camogie. Like it has everything. So I think kind of just neutral sports people would really enjoy watching them. And I know far more people now have said, oh yeah, I've seen that on Sky. So I definitely think it's opened up a lot of people's eyes to the sport.
Speaking of introducing Gaelic games and the kind of pick-up rate on people watching it, the underage structure in London specifically has been very good. I know you're involved in schools and with a club there. You've had huge success at the Feile level. I have it written here: 2010 Division 5 champions, 2013 Division 4 champion, 2014 you won Division 3, 2016 you won Division 3, 2017 you won Division 2, 2018 you won Division 2 again, and then you were finalists in 2019. That's a pretty phenomenal run to be jumping divisions that quickly with a team and with a group of kids that aren't from a traditional GAA's religion background.
Massively. Look, we had the school I was working in at the time, St Paul's Academy, the head teacher, Pat Winston, deserves unbelievable credit. The school's in a tough area of London. There's no other way to dress it up. It's in a real tough area. But Pat was huge believer in the power of sport and sport being good for kids. And football would have been like the traditional winter sport. Athletics, basketball would have been big in the school as well. But Pat found there'd be a market for Gaelic football as well. And look, he assembled a great group of teachers. And I guess without the teachers and the staff to put the time in, the kids wouldn't have had that opportunity. So there are a number of staff that deserve massive credit. But Pat set up a primary school initiative that Martin McGrath, who was in my London backroom team in 2020, he's done a lot of work for me as well. Him and myself, kind of, we were heavily involved with the primary school structure. So we'd be going into local primary schools that fed children into St Paul's and kind of upskilling their teachers as well as delivering lessons. And we always did a block of Gaelic football with the kids. So the kids in that local area were getting exposed to Gaelic football from the age of 7 or 8. So by the time they then might have transferred to St Paul's Academy, they'd have had maybe four years of kind of a 6-week block of lessons. So they had some idea of what it was about. But then when the kids were in St Paul's Academy, it was on the curriculum in there. Okay. And then look, that there was a tie between St Paul's Academy and Dulwich Harps at the time. And we used to compete within London. We had great success within London. And then the South London Feile opportunity came about. So like the background to that was there was always just one London team that went to Feiles. When I was growing up, I played for London. But if I didn't have a father heavily invested, I'd never been able to get to training, as where we lived down in South London. Training was always Northwest London. So it kind of restricted a lot of the kids that were in South London taking part. So there was a big push to get 2 teams, a North and a South London team in, which was the best thing ever happened. And it started in 07, and I was lucky enough to work with every team that went from 07 all the way up to our last participation in 19. And look, like you say, we had unbelievable success. And it was more the fact that year on year with different groups of kids, we were able to kind of keep replicating it. And I think it was purely put down to the fact that we had such a well-oiled kind of program of how to introduce kids to a sport, base all the work in their early years on skill development, no focus on winning, losing. They didn't even take part in competitive games until they got to under 12. And then from under 12, obviously they'd go into the London competitions. And then there'd be years where you had trials like for the Feile team starting, and you'd have 80, 90 kids turn up from just one school in Southeast London, which it was insane. But we were blessed. The kids bought in, but we also had just a great group of staff, headed up by Pat, that were willing to put the time into getting the kids around London to play club games, to go to Ireland on trips and tours, get practice in. But the kids were great, unbelievably good. But Pat was the driver of it and deserves immense credit for what he did for youth football in London. I guess the only shame is that not enough of those kids have stuck at the sport. Hopefully the structures improve over the next number of years to kind of retain kids of 14 and above. There's a lot of distractions in London for kids beyond that age if there's not games and opportunities. But certainly a lot of clubs rely on their underage players, coming through my own club being One Round Towers. But there's a number of clubs now that have got really strong underage systems, especially in Northwest London, that their senior clubs rely on them kids coming through. So the Feiles were excellent. It's a shame they're kind of the traditional format of Feile has gone now. Whether anything will be there for London in the future, I don't know. But those weekends were unbelievable. Some of my best memories came from coaching those Feile teams. And like you say, getting to a Division 1 final was beyond our wildest dreams.
It's a pity to hear that they are not, sticking with it. But as you said, there's so many distractions. I wanted to ask you quickly about, I think it was that 2019 team. It defeated Corfin and Austin Stacks to get to the final. Now I know you lost to Kilmacud Crokes, but for the perception of London football, that must have significantly changed people's minds. I know I watched the documentary, and it's that perception of this is London, no, sure, we're going to walk it, and you got to the final. Like, that must have been, you must have maybe noticed that bit of a switch there in the sidelines with supporters and from different clubs.
Yeah, so many people, a huge majority, were so complimentary, but then there was always the odd sticky moment where people did, like you say, kind of underestimate what we were about. But look, without a doubt, beating the likes of Stacks and Corfin was a massive, massive achievement. And it is just a shame not more of those kids have stuck with it. A couple are still playing now, but you just wonder where those kids could have been now had they stuck with it, and how stronger senior players they'd have turned into. I just hope down the line that changes. But yeah, look, we took some major scalps along the way, and I remember talking to the guys from Kilmacud afterwards. They were saying that the amount of kids, I think it ran into a couple of thousand nearly they had in their underage structure, whereas like we were a school team with a couple of other teams that were put together to make up South London, and it was just phenomenal, really phenomenal. They were an excellent team, and I know a few of their players. I kept kind of a tab on their team. A few of them boys, I'm sure, will go on to have very, very good careers in the game as well.
I asked a couple of people for questions, and one of them wanted to know, has there been much of a transition from those Feile teams into the senior team? I get the sense there's not. Is there any players currently that maybe
there's a few lads from the Thomas McCurtain's club that are still playing football.
Okay.
A couple of the boys who play for South London from the Dulwich Harp side. There's a few of them still playing now with another club, but nowhere near the amount that there should be, and that's the only kind of downside, and I guess the regret. But I guess it's the same thing. There was just a small few of us. There was 5 or 6 of us that were running the whole thing, and we were running under 12s, 14, 16 within the club, and I just wish there'd be more of a connect with the senior club to look after those kids once they move through. It's kind of I guess it's the same with every club. There's not enough volunteers to make sure that conveyor belt and pathway is in place, and also I think the structures that are in place now weren't as good as the ones. The ones that are in place now are a long way ahead of the kind of county development squads that would have been in place going back 5 or 6 years ago. So I think had we had some of them teams now, I think there'd have been a greater chance of those kids sticking at it, but it just wasn't to be at the time.
In terms of coaching, what's the coach education like over in London? What are the resources like? What is the availability like for courses and for information there?
Gavin Watchorn Gavin's actually in the senior panel. Gavin was the CDA for London. He's just stepped down from the role at the moment. But Gavin would have been very, very, very strong on the club school link and making sure that it was as strong as possible. And he did great work in his role here. They run the coaching courses, foundation badges, level 1 badges. I think there's always a market for more coach education and like upskilling by learning off each other. Yeah, definitely. And I think there's a fear sometimes among coaches of sharing ideas or learning from anyone else. I'm massive into watching videos and watch other people take sessions, and I take far more from that than I ever do a book. Like I actually am not a massive fan of reading books or reading exercises or games from books, because like it's just, it is what it is. It's on a bit of paper. Does it actually work in person? Does it work with the group you're working with? Whereas when you see someone coaching live, you might not copy that exact drill, but it might be parts of that drill, that game, that scenario that you could bring into your own session. And I think there should be so much more coach upskilling, coach sharing, that can educate coaches, because there's never a right or a wrong way in coaching. In my opinion, there's never a right or a wrong way. You've got to cut. You can only dance with the girls you've got. You have to tailor everything you do around the group you've got. If you've got a team of brilliant attacking flair footballers, well, you'll coach your team to play a certain way. If you've got a team of very, very good defenders, good athletic boys, but maybe you lack scoring prowess, then you have to focus on different sides of the game. So I think every team you work with, you've got to look at different things, and there's definitely no one set of drills or games or scenario-based training sessions that you can carry from team to team.
Okay, interesting. So who have you gone to see, and have any guest coaches come in and taken a session with your squad, or is it more you just watch others, they don't take your sessions? Do you know what I mean? Yeah,
look, we've had very, very minimal chance, obviously, of doing anything with outside-based people in the last few years. But I'd watch a lot of the stuff online. Obviously, living here, you don't get the chance. There is no kind of things that go on here, but I've seen a lot of the online sessions that have gone on, especially over COVID. That was obviously a good chance to tap into a lot of podcasts, just listening to people, sometimes watching some of the things that were on, like the YouTube live sessions that were on. I think if I was living in Ireland, it'd be a whole lot easier to kind of access those. So living here kind of does have its drawbacks in that sense, but there definitely needs to be more coach kind of sharing and upskilling going on between the clubs in London for the benefit of everyone.
Yeah. Out of interest, what sort of podcasts would you listen to? What have you found value from?
Yeah, over the lockdown, the GAA social one was very good. They interviewed a good few inter-county managers on there. Rory Gallagher's one was very, very interesting. Paddy Tally's one was interesting because he went in and kind of had to do a whole root and branch kind of restart with Down. The Irish Examiner podcast I always find interesting. The Off the Ball one was good. But I always like listening to the ones where they're interviewing managers, coaches, people kind of from a similar position, and just hearing like just some of the things you can really resonate with, what they're going through, what they have gone through, how they've overcome situations, and kind of very, very helpful in that sense.
But I'm interested to hear with, in terms of, we talked a lot about GAA coaching, but you were involved in soccer coaching. Am I right in thinking you were about 16 when you got involved in Fulham?
Yeah, I was working for Fulham's community scheme at the time, and then worked with their academy squads. They had development centres, they'd have been called at that time. It's like they'd have been centres where kids weren't quite ready for the academy, but they'd have been doing regional based kind of elite level coaching, trying to get them into the academy. Spent one season in their academy team as well, but after that I went into kind of the non-league kind of football scene, youth football to start with, at Tooting and Mitcham, Hampton and Richmond, and then ended up at Red Hill. But yeah, soccer was kind of my first real deep dive into coaching. I was doing a little bit with Roundhouse underage at the time, like with their 8s and 10s, but nothing serious. But soccer was kind of where I really cut my teeth in coaching at first. Yeah.
What's it like being involved in a professional sport compared to GAA? And I even have a quote here. You were saying with Red Hill about you need to learn how to manage budgets, players, negotiate, player transfers. How hard is it to try do everything as well as the on-field stuff?
Yeah, like Red Hill they'd be semi-professional, but with that level of football, as you said, there came like payments with players, and some players were on contract. You wouldn't have had all your players on contract.
Okay.
It was a massive eye-opener and a learning curve, and the side of it I didn't enjoy really did revolve around the money negotiations. When things were going well, players were 100% behind you. Like my first year, I did their youth team for 3 years, and their first team, they were so out to get promotion as a club. They'd gone through 11 managers in 10 years.
Wow.
And I was assisting the first team manager at the time. He walked away mid-season and left to another team. So I took on the first team to the end of the season initially, and then got the job full-time in the summer. And the remit was to get promotion within 2 years. Like the last 10 years, they failed to do it. So we stripped it back to basics. I actually got Martin McGrath to come in with me as a conditioning coach, and we just got together a group of lads. And ironically, we had a few Gaelic footballers in there. Sean Kelly, he played for London. He'd have played for Cross Malina in Maher as well. He ended up playing for Wexford in the latter stage of his club career. He's still playing in Wexford now, in our league, and brought a few GAA boys in. And we changed the mentality and the culture, and we got a culture of hard work. There was no one there that was there trying to earn money and not be willing to put a shift in. There was just a group of lads there that were fully committed, and one sole focus was getting promotion. And we did it in the first year, and like it was incredible how we did it, to be honest. Putting a brand new team together over that summer, but we did. And then the following season, we went into the Ryman League, which was the highest league they'd ever been in. Stayed in there for 2 years. In our second year, we were actually in the playoff places, and we took the club to the last qualifying round of the FA Cup. Got beaten there, and that was in the last week of October. And then everything just went wrong. Like the club kind of started to fall apart off the pitch. The chairman left. Okay. The pitch had issues. We didn't have a home game for 3 or 4 months, which knocked onto the budget. We lost a lot of the squad, and we ended up having to get young loanees in from either professional clubs or National League clubs. So you were ending up fighting relegation with 16, 17, 18-year-olds. And that 6 or 7 months, there's part of me that always looks back and says I should have walked away when things off the pitch started falling apart. Okay. And it got to the stage where me and the assistant manager, we were lining the pitch, we were forking the pitch, we were washing the kit. It got insane. And there's part of me that thinks should have walked away, but then there's part of me that is really glad I stuck at it, because I'm not a quitter. I stuck at it. We got relegated that summer and ended up parting company, and it was a great learning curve. And I learned so much more in those last 5 months than I did in the 2 years previous when we got promotion and everything was easy. I think that's one thing about coaching. You learn so much more from defeats when the times are tough than you do from wins. So stepped out of that, and then kind of it was Gaelic football from then onwards.
Very good. You've covered a lot there. I do want to ask, as a coach, are you more motivated by success or by failure? And I'm interested, you said you learn more from failure, but what motivates you more?
Whole range of things, I guess. With kids, when I'm working with kids, I deem success is like in a number of different ways. I was actually saying at the London Youth presentation recently, they were giving out awards to the teams that had won the club championships and county championships. And like the obvious form of success for most kids is seeing medals and trophies come their way at the end of the year. But for me, success with young people, boys and girls, is, are they sticking at the sport? Are they coming back week after week? Are they coming back season after season, year after year? And does that kid go into adult life playing sport still? Are they still playing football, hurling, rugby, camogie, tiddlywinks, like whatever it is? Are they sticking at it, and do they progress up? And if you've got that kid all the way up to 16 and they're still playing when they're an adult, that to me that's success. That there is success. Winning is a byproduct, I think, of having a good group of people, whether that be kids or adults. You have to get lucky with like the group you put together, injuries. There's so much to achieving a trophy at the end of a year that is outside your control. The things that are in your control is, are you putting an enjoyable environment in front of the kids? Are the kids learning? Do they feel valued? And you can't put a price on speaking to every individual within your group, even if it's a hello, pat on the back, how was your day, how's school, whatever it may be. With kids, obviously, with older men, women, you can obviously have a little bit more kind of light-hearted banter to kind of form that relationship. But success at youth level is, to me, solely on, are they coming back year after year? And if they are, you're doing your job. And then obviously, look, there's no hiding it when you get up to adult level. Everyone wants to win. You want to win, and there's no greater buzz than winning. But I think the one thing COVID has taught us all to do is appreciate what you have. So like, I saw a renewed enthusiasm within the county squad and my own club teams after we got back from COVID. It wasn't until COVID took away that ability to get together with a group of lads, ladies, twice, 3 times a week, have the crack, like people you connect with. Like it made you appreciate it so much more. And I think success in terms of club football is keeping that group together, competing. Winning is the ultimate goal. And I guess, look, when you get up to inter-county level, success is like the weekend just gone, getting that win and translating what we've done on the training pitch and seeing it carried out in a match. That's another form of success. But the obvious one is winning matches, winning trophies. So there's so much more to success than just a trophy. I mean, there's so many different parts to it.
You mentioned previously about going in with Ciaran Deely. What's it like going into your first inter-county setup? Is it a shock at the level that it's at? Do you think is it basically professional without the payment? Is it at that level now?
Yeah, very, very high performance based. Ciaran had an excellent setup. He definitely brought things on. Paul Coggins was in before him and did a tremendous job. Obviously got to the Connacht final, and Paul had it in a very, very good place. Ciaran took it on, and Ciaran obviously came from professional background, the kind of career with QPR, introduced kind of far more sports science analysis side of things, really drove things on another level. So look, it was a good learning curve for me as a coach, because I've always backed myself to be a good coach, but and a manager, but to go in and learn more about the different sides of it that you just don't get at club level, because the finance isn't there for the video analysis, for the sports science, for the psychologist, for the nutritionist, all them small things. Was a great learning curve. And look, I owe Ciaran a lot, without a shadow of a doubt. He gave me a wonderful opportunity. He took a punt to bring me in when he hadn't worked with me before. And usually kind of when you're a manager, you bring in people you know or you trust. So look, it was wonderful. I like to think I did my very, very best for Ciaran, but I certainly learned a lot off the setup that he had in place.
Mm. When you go in with a team, first of all, either as a coach or a manager, where do you start and how do you plan? Like, for example, when you get the job and you know you're going to start, let's say, next Tuesday, what do you plan in the week leading up to your first session, and how do you go about your first training session, or your first, well, more the training session rather than a meeting?
Yeah, so like I found out from Ciaran what he wanted of me, and then when I was clear what he wanted of me, my remit was kind of very much to try and shore things up with the defence, and kind of every session I'd have done would have had a defensive element to it. We did a lot of position specific stuff. So like within sessions, I knew that I'd be working solely with the backs for 45 minutes, Ciaran and Joe would have had the midfielders, the forward. So I'd always find out what Ciaran wanted of me. But going into that first session, I wanted to know what Ciaran's vision for the team was, like where he saw me adding value. And look, when you're in as a coach, you've got to support the manager's beliefs. And if there was a style of play that Ciaran wanted to play that I wouldn't have done with the club, I'd have been fully behind it. But look, our kind of beliefs, I guess, married up really, really well. And I think that's why with the whole management team that Ciaran had that year, look, we got on very, very well, and we ran Galway to 4 points in the Connacht Championship. So the proof was in the pudding. We were desperately unlucky not to come out the right side of that game. But yeah, look, just I think when you do go in as a coach first, you have to just ask the manager, what do you want from me, rather than kind of going in with your own ideas. You've got to be very transparent and willing to back that manager 100%.
Out of interest in general with any team, but particularly at maybe an intercounty level, when you have 35 or so players, how do you balance improving? Yes, you want to improve the team as a group, but improving an individual on maybe one of their weaknesses. How do you balance the group and the individual dynamic?
Yeah, like I said, look, and we still do it. We split our group in the majority of sessions. There'll be an element of the keepers will be doing a lot of individual work with the goalkeeping coach. We'll get the backs together with maybe the defensive midfielders, the forwards, the attacking midfielders, doing position-specific stuff. And that gives the coaches with them a chance to be working in a 1 to 10, 1 to 12, 1 to 15 at most ratio. And I think you get a lot more individual time, and you can pull lads aside. And like, I'm a big fan of kind of being inside the pitch at times, especially when you're trying to put a structure in place and show players where you want them to be. I think, look, I don't like getting involved in the session, on the pitch in the way too much. But I think when you're at the early stages of training a team, I think being in alongside, like for instance, our centre back, and saying, this is where we want you to press, that's the line of engagement, that's where we want the hand-on tackling to really kind of go. You can then step out, and that player's got a clear vision. If you're shouting at the sideline, there, it's very, very ambiguous words if you're saying to your left, to your right, there. Whereas if you're alongside them, even just for a few minutes, and you're guiding them where you want them to go, small things like that, I think, can really improve individuals' game understanding in terms of trying to get them to improve their strengths and their weaknesses, kind of develop their strengths and improve the things they're slightly weak on. Having one-to-one chats is absolutely huge. And like I say, like the video analysis that you can do is massive, because if you pull a guy aside and you say, look, that shot you took there at the weekend you're probably 10 yards too far out to your right, or you could have used your arm to shield the player off and give yourself an extra yard or two if you got pushed off. But having the video to back that up is absolutely massive. So I think the video analysis probably brought on one-to-one development a long, long way for every coach, because actually when you say something to a player, if you've got video proof kind of to show them what you mean, it's not just words, you've got pictures. And I think everyone learns better from actually seeing something visually.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting, because I know you were saying that your video session tonight. So is an individual video session something that you do, or is it more just if you're showing something, it's, you just pull out the video, or is it a structured thing that every player every once in a while will get an individual video session?
Yeah, so the boys will have their individual clips. Like our analyst Sean Murphy's very good. Like, he'll have tagged them at the weekend, all of the plays they were involved in, so they can look at what they did individually. We'd like them to look at the game as a whole. And then there'll be different kind of playlists, like kickouts, how we did on kickouts for and against, shooting opportunities, scores we took, scores we conceded. And then like you can go back the next night into training and really kind of knuckle down and refer to those videos that the players have had access to the night previous or 2 nights before that.
For the team then, in the video session, what do you generally show? Like, obviously things that go well and things that don't, but is there a specific structure you follow? Is there a time limit? What sort of way do you structure the video?
Yeah, we never like it to go over 20 minutes. I think anything over 20 minutes, players will tune out and zone out. I know I probably would have done as a player as well. So you kind of pick on 5 or 6 things that you think, if you're doing a recap of the weekend before, 5 or 6 things that you think went very, very well, and then maybe just 1 or 2 things that you need to improve on. I think I'm massive in terms of playing on your strengths rather than trying to improve with. I think if you say to guys, there's 5 or 6 things here we need to get right next weekend, like, that's a mountain to climb. Whereas if you say these 5 or 6 things, they went very, very well, let's keep doing these well, keep hitting your 95% on them. And the things that didn't go so well, if you try and work on 1 or 2 a week and you improve 1 or 2, then kind of there's a real positive kind of approach to it when you come back the following week, and bit by bit you'll be working on the things that didn't go quite so well, and subconsciously I think then players feel like they're improving all the time. But yeah, I'm massive on kind of developing the strengths rather than dwelling on the weaknesses.
You're a pro. My next question was, do you focus more on the strengths or weaknesses? So out of interest then, how do you measure the success of a training session?
We would distribute a session plan to the guys before training every night, and then at the end of the night when I get home, I'd look at the session plan and say, like, did we do everything we wanted to do? Did we have to go off piece too much because the session wasn't quite going to plan, or we had to spend too long on that? So the success of like that training session, have the players improved? Have they picked up the message that you wanted them to pick up? Have they improved the bits that you felt were weak the previous week? You'd kind of look back and you'd look at the individual session, and then at the end of the week, and then I guess really the big one is after the following game, you can then judge how well your training sessions went, if they were able to execute in a game, because ultimately that's when it matters. Are they able to do it in the heat of a match day environment?
Out of interest, and it's not just with this team because you're not with them long enough, but with club and maybe under Ciaran, how do you manage the challenge of the constant change of players in London? Like, for example, I know some players are born and raised there, but some players are from Ireland. They're in London for a year or two. How do you manage the constant in and out of players?
Yeah, it's definitely improved over the last few years. But the COVID, there was a real worry that we'd lose a lot of the panel. But we've got 13 that were there in 2020, which isn't bad. I think if any other inter-county manager said they only had 20 from the year previous, there'd be eyebrows raised. But for London, it isn't terrible, believe it or not. Like it's okay. And then we've got another 2 that had played previously. I think both under Ciaran actually. So we've got 15 that have played for London before, which there's about 18 that haven't. We gave 9 debuts at the weekend, which is a phenomenal amount in National League football. But I think it's testament to kind of the environment that we've created. We were able to blood 9 players into a National League game at the weekend and not one of them look out of place. That's down to them putting in the hard work, putting in the graft. But like you say, look, London is unique. You know, every year there's going to be guys there that you might have built a team around the year before, that work takes them off to another country, travel takes them off, they get the call from home. And sometimes it's just totally unavoidable. It is tough. And no matter how many steps forward you take, you might end up taking a few steps backwards through no fault of your own or the players. So it's definitely got better. It's definitely got better. And the guys we've got there, I'd hope they'd all be sticking around for a couple of years, at least, the Irish lads. But you're right, like you say, players don't come to London to play football. They come for work. They come for opportunities. And if football can fit with their lifestyle, then brilliant. But ultimately, like, they haven't come here for football. So it's trying to find the right characters and make sure they're going to be fully invested in inter-county football, and that it's not just going to kind of be come in, get the shirt and go again.
Mm. What's it like trying to run a county team in a country, in a city that isn't dominated by GAA like all of your competitors would be in the National League or in the Championship?
I think it's tough to a degree in that the guys don't have employers that understand the demands of inter-county football. So, like, you often read about home players that whenever they retire, I think you especially see them thanking their employers for their understanding and probably early finishes and no weekend working. We would often get a player an hour and a half before a session text and say, look, been caught in a meeting here. And they would just have, if they went into their boss and said, I need to get to London training, they'd be, sorry, what? They'd be laughed at. So we don't have that kind of understanding from the outside world to make sure that them guys are in the best possible place week on week. We can do what we can do. But I think if you were at home and a guy worked, I don't know, if a guy was a guard, if a guy worked for Allied Irish and they were training with a county that night, there'd be no fear of them getting to training. So that's probably the hardest thing that we have to kind of get over here, that outside our little bubble, no one else really kind of understands the magnitude of what playing inter-county football means.
Mm-hmm. What are your non-negotiable behaviours that your players must buy into? And this is a question I've taken from the High Performance podcast, but I'm also interested that with the 9 debuts you gave in the league, it's clear that there is really huge buy-in from players, regardless of players, not being around previously. But what are the non-negotiable behaviours that you have set as a team or as a management group?
Complete commitment to what we're doing. And look, we've always said to players, we're an understanding management team. We understand things crop up. Like, for instance, we've got one lad that's got to get home for a couple of days this week because there's been a death in the family. We understand that Irish lads living in London will have to get home from time to time. But the Christmas was, I guess, a real eye-opener for us in terms of the group we've got, because whereas the teams at home probably had their whole panel together over Christmas, like back home, maybe I'll just say Sligo, for instance, they might have a number of lads based in Dublin. In fact, I think they do a Dublin training session midweek with their Dublin-based lads.
Okay.
But over Christmas, they'd have had that 2-week period to completely train collectively. All of our boys were training remotely over Christmas because they'd gone to different corners of Ireland, the lads in London. So having that commitment and honesty and integrity to do the work that has to be done, whether it's collectively or remotely, is non-negotiable when you're with London, because there is that element of remote stuff. And over Christmas, to a man, the lads got the work done, and it can be, I'd imagine it'd be very, very tough. Like, you're in the midst of winter to get out and do whatever it is, a conditioning session, a running session, a skill session. For those guys to have had the commitment to do that said a lot about them. So the commitment to what we're doing is, number one, is non-negotiable. And that's down to things like their lifestyle, timekeeping, communication, doing the remote work. That are all encompassed in that. Honesty is another one, being completely honest. And then the third one, for two other ones, we always demand the lads to train as they play. We always want them to train as they play. Never train within yourself, because if you train within yourself, you're not going to turn it on when you're being double marked on a Sunday. So you have to train as you're going to play. And the last one is just being open to ideas and open to learning. And I think when you've got a group that are open to different ideas and they're flexible, they're adaptable, again, in the heat of the moment, they'll be able to respond under pressure in games a lot quicker. Like if you change your structure in a game, you change the way you're kicking the ball out or pressing a kick out, if players are open and they're adaptable, they're going to be so much better on the pitch kind of in the heat of the battle. So I think those things are what we would class as our non-negotiable behaviours.
Very good. Out of interest, with the commitment level across all counties is phenomenal, but particularly for London, where you say employers aren't as understanding, it's not the main sport. How do you keep the guys that are, say, you've your certain 15 and you've your guys that come off the bench, but the lads that say number 27 to 35, how do you keep them motivated in such a large squad in a team that, is not, let's say, for example, everyone makes the argument with Dublin, they're going for 6 in a row, but with another team, it's very hard to keep going at certain stages.
Yeah, definitely. Look, there were a few lads we had to pull aside last week, and before we went, we only ever travelled with 24 as well.
Okay.
So like that them extra 2 places, like, it makes a hell of a difference when you're leaving lads behind. And the one thing we did was, before we announced the team, we made it very, very clear that the outcome of last weekend wasn't going to be determined by the 15 men that start, the 20 that play, the 24 in the squad. It was down to the 11 lads that were left behind. They're the ones that were going to determine kind of that success last weekend, because they've got to be fully behind the team as well, take the ups with the downs, and realise that opportunities will come along. And I guess, look, the way the game went last week and the impact our bench had was the best possible thing that could have happened for this group of players, because like some of them guys, look, they'd have all been absolutely chomping at the bit to not just be in the squad, but to be in the starting team. So for the 5 subs we brought on to have had the impact they did, I think has gone a long way to telling boys opportunities will come. And I'm sure, look, this weekend, new players will make the starting team and have an opportunity. Other players will come off the bench. And we've just really, really insisted that opportunities will come players' way this year. And I think the players are buying in. We've had so many good in-house games where we flipped and flopped teams, and different players have stood up and been counted in every game. That I think the players genuinely do realise that there's going to be chances. And I think the other thing with us is, look, the times we're living in, the COVID situation, I'm sure we're probably going to lose a guy or 2 along the way at some stage to COVID, and chances are going to come up more than ever. So it's a tricky year. We have to have a big squad to make sure training is always competitive, to allow for injuries, to allow for COVID possibly intervening. But it is tough. But I think we've got a very, very understanding and supportive group that it's a 35-man kind of venture.
I'm always interested and fascinated by preparation and the level that teams go to, but it's probably unique for yourselves that you have to fly to Ireland to get here to play the game. How do you prepare for that? How do you, like, for example, I know my team, we meet 70 minutes before a game or 75 minutes before a game. When does your preparation start? How long do you try have in not only in the stadium but in Ireland before a game?
So we, for instance, we left. Well, boys were out their bed at 5 o'clock Saturday morning here. On the whole, we flew at 8. The other problem that COVID has now cropped up is the amount of flights has dramatically reduced. There used to be maybe 6, 7, 8 flights a day with Aer Lingus. There's only 2 now out of Heathrow, so we had to get on a 8:30 flight Saturday morning. Game wasn't until 7 o'clock Saturday night. So, look, our sports scientists tried to give the boys a great infographic about advice, best times to kind of eat to make sure their nutrition was right. We tried to get access to the hotel rooms for them to get like a short sleep to rest. We had a brief meeting, but again, look, I'm not massive on having long-winded team meetings because players switch off. It probably make them even more tired. And then it's just about trying to keep them relaxed and not overthinking the game as well, because sometimes you can be sitting there and when you're away from home and you don't have anything to do as such, you can overthink about what's in front of you. So, look, it's very much give the players their space. We'd have had short meetings. We'd have had the nutrition as on point as we could. The advice would have been there. Everything they could want to try and be in the right place to perform, given 7 o'clock on Saturday night, or whether it's on our next couple of away games at Sunday midday. And every game is different because like our next 2 games will be flying later on the Saturday. So they'll be having normal kind of wake up time on the Saturday. They'll have breakfast at home. And then it changes. Excuse me. It changes from game to game, but there is a lot to it. But I guess it's no different if we were Wexford and we were playing against Donegal, you'd be doing overnight stays as well. So it's not too indifferent.
Out of interest then, in terms of the pre-game talk, say, how do you structure that, and what are you, like, for example, we'll take the Carlow game. You hadn't played a competitive match in 23 months. How do you talk to a team before a game going into that scenario?
Less is more. I think less is more. Like all our work is done on the field in the week. There's only so much you can say in a change room that is going to affect the outcome of the game. I think it's more bits of motivational stuff, reminders, like key bits for positions. You get them talking in their units. The backs would be talking together, reminding each other what's deadly important. The forwards the same. But there'd be not much kind of tactical stuff going on in the change room beforehand. Great believer, let players get their own space. We'd have very brief chat, maybe a minute at the most before they go out for their first warm-up. Then when they've come back in, they're just getting themselves ready and motivated, and then just a few words of motivational advice. But I've got a great management team around me. Lorcan is terrific. Lorcan Mulvey from Cavan, he's been in London a long time. Great man in the change room, great operator, was a very, very good footballer for London himself. Joe Coulter, who was in with Ciaran as well. Delighted to get Joe back on board this year. And I think there's a good dynamic. Like there's a real mixture of personalities within the management team as well. And no one ever repeats kind of what the other has said. So the messages that go out, they're fresh and they're kind of meaningful.
I do want to get to building a management team, but water breaks are gone, so we won't talk about that. But half time, I'm always interested. Do you have a specific structure you follow? Do you group off as a management to sort out what you're going to look at? Stats, how do you manage that period of half time?
Yeah, so we always let the players go in first and just settle down, let them talk to themselves. Sometimes they'll get into their defensive attacking units. Sometimes they'll just talk to each other. So we let them in for a few minutes at the weekend. We ironed out what we wanted to get across. And again, it can only be 2 or 3 points or it's going to go astray. We got the stats from our man in the stand at the weekend. And the key one at the weekend, for example, the scoreboard did not look healthy at halftime. It was 1-7-3. But the key stat and the one we played on was both teams had 14 shots. And our 14 shots weren't from bad areas. They were actually from pretty much 12 and a 14 from what you'd call a scoring zone. So you were happy. It was just they'd scored and we hadn't. So we didn't play on the result at all at the weekend. It was more on we've been doing things fairly well for a majority of the half. tighten up at the back slightly, and we went through one or two tactical tweaks at the back. But the message was keep doing what we were doing to create those 14 chances, and the chances will come now. Look, the second half didn't start the way we'd like to have gone, but we then scored 3 in a row. We turned over 2 kickouts, and then the red card happened. The red card undoubtedly helped, but we were on a roll. We were without a doubt on a roll at that stage. We got on top. We were dominating the middle third. We were creating chances. We'd hit 3 scores and 2 wides in a row since their last score, and then the red card happened. And look, that was it. That was kind of the icing on the cake, really. If you want, we really went to town then, and got the result we richly deserved. And the bench made a massive impact. So halftime wasn't no point screaming, shouting when you're down, or dwelling on what's gone wrong. It's what can go right, what has gone right that you can develop. And look, having 1 or 2 key stats to back up what you're saying, whether it's to correct this is what's going wrong, there's the proof, or actually this is going right, don't worry about the score, take the score out of it, keep doing what you're doing, and it will come. And look, thankfully it did.
You've mentioned 2 of your backroom team there. Out of interest, how do you build a management team around you? How do you go about it? How was that structure? How was that for you going in as a manager to build your team around you?
When I got the job, I was certain who I wanted to bring in. So going into James O'Dowd, who's our S&C and sports scientist, he'd been there with Ciaran the year before and done a tremendous job. I was adamant I wanted him involved. Where we had to get a new physio, and the team doctor, Sean Carmody, who is just top class guy all round, and heavily invested in seeing London do well. He's the Chelsea ladies team doctor, so he's from a high performance background himself. He was in, and I was very keen to keep Sean involved, and Sean located our physio for us, Toby Ramsbottom. So having good recommendations made it easier in that sense. But Toby's come in as physio, and you can't underestimate the importance of having a good physio, not just for the diagnosing and the rehab of injuries, but he's a real people's person. He can communicate with lads. He can keep their morale up, their spirit up, because the real danger with injured players is they can kind of fall away and drift away mentally. They can feel dejected if the team is going well and they're not involved. Likewise, they can try rushing back too quickly. So Toby's, look, he's a great guy. He's an unbelievably good physio, but an even better person. Phil Roach, our kit man. Phil's 75 years of age, but he embodies everything that is good about London football. He's top class, top man. And the boys, like, they had a good get together a couple of weeks ago for his 75th birthday. And I think like the gift they got him was kind of, it summed up exactly what like they think of the man. And he just embraces everything that's good about London GAA. So then in terms of like the coaching and the selectors, I was absolutely adamant I wanted people that could coach and have an opinion. I don't want yes men. I don't believe in having yes men. You need people that are going to challenge your thoughts. So Martin McGrath was one, trusted Martin, great coach. He couldn't stick at it this year because he's just had a newborn baby. So Joe's replaced him. And obviously I knew Joe, and Joe's a great coach, great guy. He knows London football. But Lorcan was the one that I really wanted to get involved, because I've got great respect for what he did for London as a player. He was London's only ever All-Star nominee. And he was with Fulham Irish, who are a high achieving club kind of year after year. So Lorcan was a tremendous addition. He didn't hesitate to come in. And look, I think we've got a great dynamic. We're all behind each other. We're all supportive of each other. There's no one pulling in a different direction. And it's a small backroom team, but it's tightly knit, very tightly knit. Mm-hmm. And Gavin McAvoy is the newest addition this year, and as the goalkeeping coach. Gavin's played for London for a number of years, so Gavin, obviously, he knows the drill inside out, and I think it was very important to have someone that could relate to what the boys go through as well. So Gav's a great addition to us, and look, we're delighted with our backroom team, really delighted. But it's important you get the right characters and people that will buy into what you want to do. They'll be fully behind you, and even when times are bad, they'll have your back.
Yeah, exactly. Out of interest, from your perspective and what you've seen and the people you have involved, is it important for a coach or a manager to have played the sport? And I'm saying this in terms of it doesn't have to be Gaelic football, or you could make it specific to Gaelic football. Is it important or essential that a coach has experience playing, or is it better not to have experience playing? What do you think?
I think to have had some kind of a playing experience and playing career of sorts, whether it's club or county, is important, because you need to be able to relate to certain situations. But I would never say that an inter-county manager would have had to have been an inter-county player, or a professional football manager needed to have played professional football. I think you need to have an understanding of the game from a player's point of view, so that you can put yourself in a player's shoes. Like, what the message you're trying to get across, how do you need to relay that to the player? And unless you've been a player, you'll know what coaching advice you responded to best. So I'd always think back to when I was playing, like what coaches like I responded best to, and how they went about their business, which ones kind of did I relate the most to. So I think you need to have played a bit to have had that understanding and be able to communicate with the players. Did you need to be able to pull up trees as a player? I don't think so.
Okay, interesting. Speaking of players, could you break down the most common characteristics of the most successful and most driven players you've seen or coached, and what would they be? Sorry, that's a bit of a mouthful there.
Yeah, completely driven, completely focused. Like I think I worked with a few kids at soccer. A couple of them have gone on to have professional careers. There's a boy, Kane Woolery, who played at Redhill. He's playing for Motherwell now. But Kane, he was travelling long distances, and we brought him into the first team at 16 years of age. And you could just tell from Kane's learning, his demeanour, his attitude, his focus, the work he did outside of the training sessions. And that's the key one for me, is the work that a player will do outside, whether that's physical development, skill development, or learning from videos. Kane was just driven, and he was one example of a boy that was just going to go all the way to the top, and he got his lucky break. Football was a hard industry to make it as a pro in, but Kane did it. But he was not afraid as a 16-year-old to come into a men's change room. He'd done terrifically well with us. There were scouts from, I think it was Hull at the time, were watching him quite closely. But he made his way up non-league football first at Maidstone, Tamworth. And then Kane got his lucky break. So I guess with club footballers in London, it's very, very much like a social outlet for guys. So they take it seriously. But I think if you're working with a senior club at home, maybe in a Dublin or a Cork or a Kerry, you'd see that real extra bit of commitment outside of it. But don't get me wrong, look, the top 7-8 senior teams here, the standard is very, very good. And I do see it, like my own club, Round Towers, we have a number of lads who are willing to go above and beyond to look after themselves. I think it's just the dedication to being the best you can be. And there's so many different parts to that: looking after yourself, watching your alcohol intake, watching your diet, asking questions, and look, when the chips are down, not having a bad attitude. A good attitude goes a hell of a long way to anything in sport.
Can you teach work ethic and attitude, or is it something that players either have or they don't have? What do you think?
I think you can mould it. I think they've got to have a natural degree of willingness to commit and have that work ethic. And I think you'll always mould it if they come into an environment that allows them to be the best they can be. I think players would very, very quickly find you out and find the structure out if it wasn't challenging enough, if it wasn't professional enough for them. So I think if you've got a committed player, they will show all the right traits, and you'll mould them into a very, very hard-working player if the environment demands that of them and allows them to be the best they can be. I think if an exceptionally talented player walked into a setup that was slack, their training wasn't organised, like drills are being set up one after the other, there was work being done that didn't relate to match days, for instance, they'd quickly kind of lose interest, lose heart, and you wouldn't blame a player then for not having that complete buy-in that you'd want them to have. So I think a player has naturally got to have the traits to be a hard worker. But I think the environment you create then really moulds that player into an incredibly hard-working person.
I don't know if this has changed now, but when you were named manager, I think you were second youngest. Why do you coach? Why have you gotten involved in management? What do you see as your purpose or your so-called why?
Yeah, it's actually my favourite quote. What's your why? And my why is seeing people develop, like being in a team environment, being on that journey. And London, look, being involved with London it's a journey. Like nothing is straightforward or given. Teams look at us in the fixture list and say, well, there's 2 points. Like I don't think we can ever do that to another team. We'd never take another team for granted. But it's the thrill of a win. It's the thrill of getting that result after the work. And like the 30 seconds after a big win, like euphoria in them 30 seconds, nothing to me can match that. Like the emotion in them 30 seconds is something far reaching. So like Saturday was an unbelievable example of the way that we got the win. But just them 30 seconds after the game, like you're in heaven almost. Like it's just incredible, and nothing can touch that. You didn't let it go back to work on the Monday and you land with a bang. But like our focus is now, can we now repeat that and get that against Watford again? And I guess, look, the club element is slightly different. That's the real kind of community stuff. Seeing the group that you're happy to be with week on week, seeing the development of individuals within the group and seeing the group develop, and winning is like, it's a real nice luxury. But when you step up to Inter-County, it's to challenge yourself and it's to be part of an exciting journey, hopefully.
Brilliant. It's certainly my mission to find the answer to this question, but what would you see as the most underrated skill or attribute in the game at the moment?
A good one. Players being able to kick off 2 feet.
Okay.
Players I find are so one-sided, and look, the skill of kick passing went out of the game for a short while, and we don't want ever to restrict our players, but players can always do more, and we always encourage our guys, like the 20 minutes they're on the pitch before the session, after they've done their mobility work, activation work, prehab work, we really encourage them to work on the skills that they need to work on that are specific to their position. So if our midfielders are on the pitch before, I'd like to see them kicking off both feet, hitting the ball at angles, hitting inside forwards. If it's our backs carrying the ball out, passing off 2 hands, I'm very, very big on players executing the skills really, really well. And I think over the last number of years, there was such an emphasis on fitness and game plans that the key skills were kind of neglected a bit. And we always spend a period every night working on their skills in a closed environment and an open environment. And just before training, those 20 minutes before training, if players do position-specific stuff, it could bring them on something scary over the course of a year.
Yeah.
It's getting them in the mindset of doing that.
I was going to ask, again, you're a pro. I was going to ask, how often do you practice the basics? But how often do you have kind of the small-sided versus a full pitch game in terms of your session? What's the ratio there?
We, especially this year, we did a lot of like full-sided. Well, now, when I say full-sided games, we train on a rugby pitch. We don't have.
Okay.
There's no floodlit football pitch in London, unfortunately. So we're limited to a rugby pitch. Now, we widen the sidelines by 4 or 5 meters to where the barriers are.
Yeah.
But obviously, we can't extend the length. So, like it really, I guess it's a medium to 75% sided game that we would be playing when we play that full game. So it's one thing that we would just love. And I think it will be after my time, by the time that there is a floodlit training facility for London as such. But the pitch we've got is excellent. But we've got the best facility possible at the moment. We would have done a lot of full-sided games in training and stopping the games as they're going and correcting kind of things that we need to correct. Within then large-sided games, I think sometimes the small-sided stuff, players then can't relate what you're doing into the bigger stuff. I prefer to do a small amount of time on the small-sided stuff and kind of the closed space games, and then get it into a bigger game as quickly as possible. Because I don't know, if you're working on transitioning from defence and you're doing it like as a 6v6 kind of thing with just your backs, they don't then have that kind of the add-on bit where they're transitioning the ball to midfield, and what happens now is kind of, well, we've scored, we ran through that gate. That really isn't the game. You're trying to give them the bigger picture all the time. It's finding the balance. I think there's certainly a call for small-sided stuff sometimes, but I really do like doing the large-sided stuff and trying to relate it to a match as much as possible.
Okay, interesting. You mentioned there kind of your tenure with London. When you eventually do finish, at whatever point that is, where do you hope to bring the team and bring the county team?
Individually for the players, I want them all to, whenever their time finishes with the panel, be it 1 year, be it 5 years, I'd like them to say that they've improved as a player. So that's the individual side of it. As a collective, I don't think it's ever realistic for us to sit here and say we're going to go and win Division 4 or we're going to win the Connacht Championship, but we go out to try and win every game, if that makes sense. I think obviously being London is tougher sometimes, the degree. If we had that full size Gaelic pitch to train on, I think we could bring it on to another level. I think that's the next step in London's development. But look, I'm not complaining. We've got a fantastic facility, but I don't think we'll ever sit and say we want to get promotion or win an All-Ireland. However, I'm a big fan of the Towson Cup, and I think that's going to be really, really good competition for us, because no matter whether your performance in the Connacht Championship has taken you to the latter stages of it, if we beat Leitrim, if we're lucky enough to beat Leitrim, or you have a bad performance, the next game is a winnable game. Whereas years gone by, if you've had a positive performance in the first round of Connacht, you could be desperately unlucky and end up playing Tyrone, Monaghan, anyone that might have lost their first round in their province.
Yeah.
And for those next 6 weeks, trying to motivate the players to play against the team that they deep down they know this is an impossible task. Whereas regardless, win, lose or draw that first round, if we have a second round in Connacht, you know that the game that you're going into in the Towton Cup is a potentially winnable game if you get everything right, if you get a bit lucky with the draw, if you get a home tie. It's a winnable game. So I think that competition for us is one where we'll say, look, we really want to try and get to the semi-final of like an all-Ireland competition. So I think that for us this year, that's when we'll be at our peak, and it'll be really, really nice to win a couple of games in the Towton Cup this year.
Brilliant. I'm going to quickly move on to the sideline 7. I'm just conscious you probably have to go.
No problem.
Question 1, you kind of said it already, so I'm going to split it into 2 questions. But what is your favourite quote in terms of using it with the team? Would you use quotes much as with the group?
No, not really. I've said to them, "What's your why?" a few times. I ask myself that every night I'm at training. I've asked the players a few times, especially when you're in a damp, dark, miserable night in December, getting them to reflect on why they're there. I think it's stronger than kind of any of the cliche kind of quotes. I'm not massive on them, wouldn't have them up on walls in change rooms or anything.
Okay.
We're very much about moulding our culture of the team and focusing on what works for us.
Brilliant. Question 2, what's the best sporting event you've been to?
All-Ireland football final.
Brilliant.
Definitely.
Nothing beats it.
Nothing beats it.
Brilliant. No. Question 3, what's been the biggest setback or challenge so far in your career, and how did you react to it?
The time at Red Hill, the last 6 months at Red Hill was incredibly tough. Just massive learning curve for a whole number of reasons, and recovered from it, ironically, by going straight into managing Round Towers at club level. And Towers were at a really low ebb, like they'd just been murdered in the Championship. They'd played in 2 successive relegation playoffs in the Championship, and kind of it was going and do a complete kind of overhaul of the methods in the club, the way it was approached. And look, we've turned Round Towers into a really, really well-respected senior team now that often gets to the latter stages of championships. We've won a few senior trophies, senior cups along the way, and kind of going from the lows of that soccer into a brand new challenge, and using all that learning from the previous few years of Red Hill, I think it was a really few pivotal months in my own coaching development.
Mm-hmm. On the flip side then, what would be your biggest achievement on or off the pitch?
Few things. The Feile successes were massive, absolutely massive. Promotion with Red Hill was huge, personally and for the club. And I have to say, Saturday's game just gone. That's one of my proudest moments, without a shadow of a doubt. Just so proud of the players. Delighted for the people of London, the people that have stuck with it, the lads that stuck with it. And it was no mean feat to go 23 months without a game and to win it, but to win it from 10 points down, it was measure of the group we've got. Now look, it's feet on the ground and try and back it up. But it was definitely one of the best moments in my coaching career, definitely.
Brilliant. Looking back, what advice would you give your 18-year-old self?
Focus on the bigger picture. Don't get too wrapped up in when you start out coaching, you get handed manuals and books. This is how you do it. There's no right or wrong way. And I'd advise any young coach to be creative, come up with ideas themselves. If they want to develop shooting in soccer, for instance, draw up something brand new. Don't go to your level 1 or level 2 coaching manual and pull something that someone who is probably 75 years of age now at that time drew up 20 years ago. Go and find something new, develop something new. Don't be afraid to change and adapt, even within sessions, and just talk to other coaches and be. I wish at a younger age there was a bit more kind of coach educational, just learning or sharing of ideas than there was. It was very much, you've got to do your coaching badge, read this book, do this. Yeah. Now you're a coach. You're not a coach. Nothing can prepare you for coaching until you've gone out and you've done sessions with kids, boys and girls of all ages, of all levels, elite, grassroots, men, ladies, and I'm so pleased I took on the Round Towers ladies team a few years ago, because it added another element to my coaching, my personality, how you deal with different people. So I'd say if I could go back to my 18-year-old self again, I'd say be more creative. Don't just work with youth soccer teams or commit to just one team. Like, dip in and out of different sports, different age groups, go and shadow coaches at the elite level where you might not get taken on as a coach yourself. And definitely don't read coaching manuals.
Brilliant. Who would be your dream dinner guest and why? And you can open up the table to a few people if you want.
Alex Ferguson, one. Not a Man United fan, but just how he got success year after year, like the adaptability that man must have had to kind of mould different teams, I guess 3 or 4 different times over his tenure. He must have been a master of delegating, creating different cultures. Love to tap into him. Jim McGuinness would be another one. Read his book and found his book fascinating. And the thing that really kind of stood out to me was he'd gone for the job like a few times and got knocked back. Now the measure of the man was he went the 3rd time and got it and did what he did. And just the way he was so brave to do it in the style he did with the style of play, and people berate him, but the man has an all-iron medal in his back pocket. Like, I don't think he's going to be too worried about the people that are saying his football was puke football. It might have been puke football, but Donegal wanted an all-iron, and he brought that to them, and he brought the game on another level. Davy Fitzgerald, I think I'd love to spend an hour with.
This would be a very interesting dinner party now. I think I'll have to join this one.
Yeah. And mother and father, like they're 2 huge influences on me. Dad is so heavily invested. Like, he nearly knows the score of a game before I rang him and told him. Like, they were sitting listening to Carlow Kilkenny radio Saturday night, and they're just so into everything. And look, if you need to be brought back down to earth after a big win, he's the man to do it. Or something. You nearly lost. So like, I think that'd be a good mix. It'd be an interesting conversation anyway.
Brilliant. Final question before I let you go. If your life was a book, what chapter would this be called?
The London Journey.
The London Journey. That's it.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Look, Michael, thank you so much for coming on. The very best of luck this weekend and beyond. And thanks again.
Thanks very much, all. Enjoyed the chat. Thank you.
A massive thank you to Michael for joining me on the podcast today. I thoroughly enjoyed our chat and I hope he got something from it. I just want to wish him and all of the London GAA senior football team the very best of luck with the rest of the season. If you are enjoying the podcast, I'd really appreciate if you leave a rating and a review over on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, as it does help the show grow. A massive thank you to Chin Up Goggles for getting behind the coaching series.